Transforming your life through hypnotherapy has never been easier. With the help of your host, Julie from coachinghypnosis.net, and these power-packed minisodes, you're sure to find yourself engaging in more positive behaviors around both your physical and mental health. Here's your host, Julie.
G'day, it's Julie from coachinghypnosis.net, and you deserve to know the 5 outrageous political hypnosis tricks for 2022, because people have had enough of being a friggin' legend and feeling a bit loopy at the same time. And I'm not a therapist or psychotherapist, but this is my 9th year as a clinical hypnotherapist in strategic psychotherapy. I currently help my clients online. They change their life without changing out of their pajamas. And as an organic hypnotherapist, I kind of don't know how to start something like the Russia's internet research agency, the IRA, that caused chaos on social media, or to overthrow the president in Gabon using a computer-generated AI deepfake. I also don't know how to stage a coup d'etat in the Tory party in the United Kingdom, or Brexit, but what I do know is a little bit about body language and the hidden meaning in the deep structure of language and how to put people into trance. And you deserve to know the truth about what can be achieved by observing hypnosis in politics. And I can only imagine someone like you that's unleashed your inner patience, made yourself as zen as fuck, already has been bombarded with information on body language. And while I'm aware body language plays an important role in solving crime, people try and turn body language into a concrete vocabulary, as Richard Bandler likes to say, as if holding your head back meant you were reserved and crossing your legs meant that you were closed. But body language doesn't work like that. It's different. Eye movements and body movements will give you information about a process. For example, if someone tilts their head to the left, it suggests they might not be listening. If they tilt it to the right, it suggests that they might not like what you said. But at the same time, maybe what you said just made no sense. And it doesn't mean when they do that they don't like me, they think I'm a fat, ugly troll, or hope I die and never have children. Because Freud used to think that men who had long hair wanted to sleep with their mother. And in the world of NLP, we call him Sick Man Freud, because that's a bit sick. Folding your arms, crossing your legs, looking someone straight in the eye when you talk to them doesn't mean you're hiding information, because everyone's different. Welcome to the vortex. And before I share with you the 5 hypnotic language techniques used by politicians to stir emotions, sometimes it's worth finding out the deeper meaning. Because in Richard Bandler's book, The Structure of Magic, Volume 1, he has a client, Ralph, who's 34 years old and works as an assistant manager in a division of a large electronics firm. The therapist asked the client what he hopes to get out of the interview, and it began a bit like this. Ralph said, "Well, I'm not really sure." "You're not sure of what?" "Ralph, I'm not sure this will be helpful." The therapist asked for the missing portion of the deep structure by asking, "You're not sure of what? Specifically will be helpful to whom?" "Well, I'm not sure this experiment will be helpful, you see. When I first went to Dr. G, he asked me if I'll be willing to participate in this experiment, and well, I feel there's something I really need help with, but it's just an experiment." The therapist asked, "How will this just being an experiment prevent you from getting the help that you need?" Ralph isn't aware he's about to respond with a restatement of the implied causative of this but that, or X but Y, by saying, "Experiments are for research, but there's something I really need help with." "What specifically do you really need help with?" "Ralph, I don't know how to make a good impression on people." Again, a similar pattern of this is good for that. The therapist chooses to ignore it. Ralph said he doesn't know how to make a good impression on people, but fails to state how he knows this to be true. The therapist checks with the client to make sure he understands the client's model of the world. So the therapist asks, "Let me see if I understand you. You're saying that this just being an experiment will necessarily prevent you from finding out how to make a good impression on people. Is that true?" Ralph, "Well, I'm not really sure." The therapist knows he successfully challenged the client's thinking and interrupts, "Well, are you willing to find out?" "Yeah, okay." The therapist refers to the client's ill-formed surface structure. "Who specifically don't you know how to make a good impression on?" "Well, nobody." The therapist asks, "Nobody? Can you think of anyone you've ever made a good impression on?" Ralph, well, yeah, people. But the therapist for a second time requests a referential index by asking, now then, whom specifically don't you know how to make a good impression on? Ralph, I guess what I've been trying to say is that women don't like me. The client responds with the same ill-formed violation of surface structure with both nouns containing no referential index, people and women, and it's a mind read claiming to know the emotional state of the other human being. Which woman specifically? Ralph, most women I meet. The client vows to deliver a referential index, so asks again, which woman specifically? Ralph, well, most women really, but just as you said that, I started to think about one woman, Janet. Who's Janet? She's this woman that I met at work. The therapist challenges the mind read. How do you know you didn't make a good impression on Janet? Well, I just know. How do you know specifically? She just didn't like me. How specifically do you know that Janet didn't like you? She just wasn't interested in me. Again, the client claims to know the knowledge of another inner state. The therapist again challenges the mind read. Interested in what way? Ralph, she didn't pay attention to me. Again, the therapist challenges the mind read. How do you know she didn't pay attention to you? Finally, Ralph replies with something that isn't a mind read and says, she didn't look at me. Therapist checks. Let me see if I understand this. You know that Janet wasn't interested in you because she didn't look at you. Yes, that's right. The therapist decides to challenge, this means that. Is there any way you could imagine Janet not looking at you and still being interested in you? Ralph, I don't know. The therapist again challenges, this means that. Do you always look at everyone you're interested in? Ralph isn't aware he's about to respond with another mind read and says, I guess not always, but just because Janet is interested in me doesn't mean that she likes me. The therapist again challenges the mind read. How specifically do you know that Janet doesn't like you? Ralph again responds with a mind read and says, she doesn't listen to me. Therapist, how do you know specifically she doesn't listen to you? The client moves backwards, replies with a mind read. Well, she doesn't ever look at me. You know how women are. They never let you know if they notice you. The therapist asks for a referential index by asking specifically who. Ralph replies with a similar surface structure, but this time replaces Janet with his mother by saying, like my mother, God damn it, she was never interested in me. Therapist challenges the surface structure. How do you know that your mother was never interested in you? Ralph, every time that I cared about her, she never noticed. Ralph starts to sob. Why didn't she notice? Ralph again responded with a mind read, but this time there were two new pieces of information. First, two universal quantifiers, time and never. An example of a universal quantifier is, all cars have wheels. And second, Ralph responded with a bunch of verbs, show, care, about, notice. So the therapist wants to know how the action words, the verbs, fit into Ralph's logical constant of the world. So the therapist asks Ralph, how specifically did you try and show her that you cared about her? Ralph, like all the time I used to come home from school and do things for her. The therapist asks, what things specifically did you do for her? Again, Ralph responds with a mind read. Well, I always used to clean up the living room and wash the dishes and she never noticed and she never said anything. The therapist ignores all that stuff and wants to check this means that and asks Ralph, does your mother not saying anything to you about what you used to do mean that she never noticed what you had done? Ralph agrees this is true and equals it by saying yes. Since she never noticed what I did for her, she wasn't interested in me. The therapist checks to verify. Let me get this straight. You're saying that your mother not noticing what you did for her means she wasn't interested in you. Ralph verifies, yes, that's right. The therapist asks, Ralph, have you ever had the experience of someone doing something for you and you didn't notice until after they pointed it out to you? Ralph, well, yeah, I remember one time. The therapist challenges, this means that. Did you notice what they had done for you because you weren't interested in them? Ralph denies the equivalence by replying, no, I just didn't notice. And so the therapist reverses the challenge. Ralph, can you imagine that your mother just didn't notice when? Ralph interrupts and says it's not the same. The therapist, what's not the same as what? Ralph gives the information the therapist has requested and responds with, my not noticing is not the same as my mother not noticing. See, she never noticed what I did for her. The therapist asks, Ralph, tell me about one specific time your mother noticed what you had done for her. Ralph, well, once, yeah, I even had to tell her. Had to tell her what? That I had done this thing for her. If she had been interested enough, she would have noticed it herself. Interested enough for what? Ralph responds with a mind read, interested enough to show me she loved me. Therapist asks, Ralph, how did you show your mother that you loved her? By doing things for her. The therapist checks if this means that. Ralph, did your mother ever do things for you? Ralph denies the equivalence by saying, yes, but she never let me know for sure. Therapist, never let you know what? Ralph, she never let me know for sure that she loved me, still sobbing softly. Therapist, did you ever let her know for sure that you loved her? Ralph responds with a mind read, she knew. How do you know she knew? Ralph, I guess I don't. The therapist asks, what prevents you from telling her? Ralph, maybe nothing. The therapist asks, maybe? Ralph, I guess I could. The therapist decides to ask Ralph a question that requires no mind reading. Ralph, do you guess you could also tell Janet how you feel about her? Ralph, that's a little scary. Therapist, what's a little scary? Ralph, that I could just go up and tell her. The therapist, what stops you? Ralph, nothing. That's what's so scary. And at that point, the therapist moved into a non-meta model technique. And as you know, in politics, you can do the same. You can argue a lot, debate a lot, listen or not listen, just say it, find it scary, but you get nowhere if you don't follow the correct process. Here are the 5 hypnotic language techniques used by politicians to stir emotions, form perceptions, and gain influence. 1. Metaphors. I can only imagine someone like you is aware of the BS stories said by politicians and political speeches are full of metaphors. Next time you're watching Fox, CBS, BBC, or Al Jazeera, you might begin to notice short stories and metaphors that have an emotional kick. For example, once upon a time, long, long ago, the townspeople started to get really strange symptoms. They finally realized the damage of the smokestacks of the factory were doing to them. Even though the factory employed so many of them, provided for their family, they realized they had to shut the factory down so they could start breathing again, get their health back. Because what's the point of having a good job if the way you're thinking about things is making you sick? 2. Winning hearts. Politics and hypnosis is a fascinating combo. You can think of ways to make your audience feel fabulous. For political influence, here are some examples used in hypnosis. Let me remind you how mesmerizing you are. As a small baby, people would have stared into your adorable little eyes and wondered what you were thinking, and that is most likely still the case today. No one knows what it's like to be you. The privilege of being you. You are of great significance. No one has your long, elegant spine, your graceful way of getting through life's baloney, your perfectionistic standards, your ability to stand up for justice, your diligence to know right from wrong, your ability to stand up for yourself. That's how significantly original you are. 3. Themes. Martin Luther King used the theme of freedom. It wasn't a typical hot summer's day when Martin Luther delivered the speech of I Dream a Dream in Washington, but oppressive heat was something that the audience was used to as he spoke the moving words of I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state of sweltering heat of injustice, sweltering in the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. And General Douglas MacArthur at the U.S. Military Academy, West Point, 1962, accepting the Thayer Award, used the theme of duty, honor, country, and began with, as he was leaving the hotel that morning, a doorman asked him, "Where are you bound for, General?" And he replied, "West Point." He remarked, "A beautiful place. Have you ever been there before?" No human could fail to be deeply moved by such a tribute as this coming from a profession I have served so long and people I have loved so well. It fills me with an emotion I cannot express. But this award is not intended primarily to honor a personality, but to symbolize a great moral code, the code of conduct and chivalry of those who guard this beloved land of culture and ancient descent. And he continues, duty, honor, country, those 3 hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. And while you're here listening, I don't know if you've ever been to a beautiful place that fills you with an emotion you can't express, you can breathe. It fills you with pride, a code of conduct, or values you're proud of. But my guess is someone like you knows exactly what I was just doing. 4. Hypnotic anchors. Great political leaders can anchor negative and positive emotions on their political opponents. And maybe you've seen great athletes anchor themselves. They have these rituals that create a positive state for them The Canadian professional ice hockey player Patrick Roy would skate backwards into the net before every match. It made the goal shrink and seem smaller. Gridiron coach Les Miles would eat the grass or turf before each match to let him know he was part of the field, and he once said the grass at the Tiger Stadium tasted the best. The football player Cristiano Ronaldo would comb his hair different, then change it again at halftime, because if you wanted to anchor someone, to feel as though they could live out their full human potential, you could say, maybe long, long ago there was a time when you were very small, when you questioned the abundance of your potential. Maybe you knew you were magnificent, alive, fully awake, and I don't know if you thought you could fly, walk through walls, become invisible. I don't know if you were inspired by cartoons, computer games, action heroes, but what I do know is you were fully awake on the inside. 5. Repetition. As soon as you take part in the emotional roller coaster, you become Pavlov's dogs. It's like you're programmed to salivate, even when you're not given food for dinner. Only the dinner bell's been rung. And maybe in the past you've experienced outrage. Maybe you've even had a desire to cry out in a louder voice, "What's this story about? What's this nonsense?" Are you kidding? Now you know the 5 outrageous political hypnosis tricks for 2022. So what if you thought about politics and hypnosis differently? And what if you didn't? The choice is yours.